Egypt, which is the next country, just because Kuwait has this one-star person. The average for Egypt is 140 parking tickets per diplomat per year. So it's basically one a day for every diplomat in the whole mission in the UN. So this is just tons of violations. And countries like Chad, Sudan, Bulgaria, etc. are over 100. So again, not all these folks necessarily have cars. Not all of them are driving all the time. They're diplomats, so they're traveling a lot, and they're still averaging basically a violation per workday. So just incredible numbers of violations. And just in terms of what I mentioned before, you can see, unfortunately, there's a very large representation of sub-Saharan African countries, including Nigeria, which comes in there at quite a high level of violations. There are some Middle Eastern and North African countries, Bulgaria and Albania, as well as Pakistan is there. So there is geographic variation, but it was quite striking for us in looking at this data just how overrepresented the African countries are. We have presented this and we've thought about the issue that was raised about how expensive parking is could be a factor and could explain some of these violations. But again, you get a very similar pattern of countries even if you look outside work hours. So it's got to be something more than that. And if you look at the right-hand most column, that index is the corruption index collected by Transparency International, the sort of international NGO that tries to gather survey data to measure corruption across countries. And we've normalized their index, so the mean is 0. It's sort of like how we normalize test scores. The mean is 0 and standard deviation 1. We just couldn't help ourselves. We had to do that. So what you can see here is if it's a positive number, it means you're more corrupt than average for the world. If it's a negative number, the country is considered less corrupt. So it's pretty interesting because all these countries come out positive, meaning they're more corrupt than average, based on this totally different metric, except for Kuwait. So again, maybe Ambassador X was just, I don't know what was going on exactly with Ambassador X. But a lot of these other countries are actually quite corrupt, and this is where the sort of Nigeria case comes in, because Nigeria is actually one of the most corrupt of all these countries in terms of the standard indices. Yeah.
I just have a question about calculating the pilot.
Yeah.
I know there's the UN mission here too, but isn't there also a lot of other consulate offices and everything? Like, how do you focus on your calculating?
So the my understanding is our sort of blue book of diplomats in New York with diplomatic immunity captures all those diplomats. That's my sense of it. Okay, so I mean that is the bulk of the diplomats because there are large UN missions, but that's my understanding of this data. That is quite comprehensive. Okay, on the other hand, if we look at the countries with no violations per diplomat at all, no unpaid violations, in countries with at least 5 diplomats, because there's a couple of very, very small countries with 1 or so, you see a lot of wealthy countries, although not entirely wealthy countries. Panama's there, Jamaica's there, etc., Ecuador, so there's definitely some variation in country income levels. But you see a lot of wealthy countries, Norway's there, and here you see almost all, you see mainly negative numbers. You see some positive numbers or numbers near 0 for the corruption index, but lots of very negative numbers as well. So there is this correlation in the data. I'm not going to get into the exact progressions. I'll show it to you graphically. The countries that are considered very corrupt using other data, it turns out their diplomats just get a lot more parking tickets than the countries that come through as being quite non-corrupt using other data. That's a very strong pattern in the data. So again, I talked about these other corruption measures being really imperfect. They're based on surveys. We don't know how much to trust them. Obviously, the diplomatic parking measure is imperfect. It's based on one type of government official and one type of setting. But the fact that there's such a strong correlation between the two maybe suggests there's something there. That maybe each of them is capturing something in common. Okay, so let me pause for a second. Yeah, is there a comment back? In this list here? I would say 2 things. First, even if you look at this list, a lot of these are not English speaking. First. Second, UN business is mainly conducted in English in New York, and these are diplomats even from poor countries tend to be quite well educated. So my guess is, they may not have understood the first time, but when they got the 5 parking tickets under the windshield, I think they could have asked somebody, what does this say? So I'm not too worried about it. But I think you're onto something else, which is there may be a cultural dimension, or there may be some notion where cultural affinity matters. I mean, one of the things, I'm not going to get into all the details here, but there are very strong regional effects, it turns out, of these parking tickets. And so, for instance, some of the sort of sub-regions where you actually have in opinion surveys, quite pro-American views. There are these global Gallup surveys and other surveys that try to capture different types of social and political attitudes. People from those sub-regions that tend to have some sort of cultural affinity for the U.S. have fewer parking tickets per diplomat than predicted by, say, corruption or income levels or other things. So there's certain Central American countries with, in surveys, incredibly strong pro-American feeling, and their diplomats, sure, they have quite a few parking tickets, but fewer than you would predict. That comes through with some of the West African countries as well, the English-speaking West African countries. In contrast, in some of the Middle Eastern and North African countries that during this period had very strongly anti-American views, those countries tend to have more diplomatic parking tickets per diplomat than predicted by all the other variables. So the global opinion data strongly predicts parking tickets, which is kind of interesting, and I think it tells us something about norms and cultures of rule breaking. Maybe if I feel attached to the rules, and I feel some affinity for the rules, or I feel that the rules have some legitimacy, I'm going to be more likely to follow them. If I'm in sort of opposition to the rules, I don't feel much affinity for the authority, maybe I'm more likely to break the rules. So I think it sheds light on either the psychology of rule breaking or how norms develop around rule breaking. But again, I should have maybe put it up here, but we talked about it a little bit in the chapter and in our paper, that there are countries that look a little bit like outliers, but we can explain some of that with attitudes. Any other comments or thoughts on these patterns? Way in the back? Oh, I see. So that's an interesting question that has come up, which is if you have a personal driver, the driver could kind of maybe circle around or move the car, when you get in trouble. So we don't have data. We don't have data on that. And it's a possible explanation for some of it. And it kind of gets back to the wealth effect that maybe some very wealthy diplomats could kind of get away with things. So we can't fully control for that. Again, we would say that. Let me just leave it at that. I talked about some of the other checks. Yeah, Lauren? Oh, you're saying because of diplomatic immunity you can get away with other things? We don't have any other kind of systematic data on diplomats, so I'm not sure. We just kind of got lucky we got this one. David? Is there data on who's been removed from the country? Because that's kind of what happens. If you commit a really heinous crime, they can't do that, but they have to leave right now. We do have the data on which people are credentialed to be diplomats, but it doesn't give the reason in the data we have. We would have to do news reports or something, so there isn't any systematic data on that, unfortunately. Yeah. I'm assuming he was partying in Greenwich Village at midnight on Friday night. I don't know what he was doing. Yeah. That's interesting. We've looked at the data separately, but we haven't sort of systematically tried to figure out. I mean, that would potentially get to some of these issues. If you're a poor diplomat, maybe you only do things during the work hours. I think we get very similar patterns looking at the sort of after work hours, but we haven't gone into all the detail in analyzing it. So it's an interesting question. In the back. Yeah. 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 In New York City. I see. So, I mean, the case of Israel is a very interesting one because Israel in the 80s had some of the most violations, and there was this big crackdown. So there are certain countries that have had basically crackdowns on their diplomats. Now, that still counts as being norms rather than rules because it doesn't apply. It isn't the legal rules in New York that's causing it. It's just some sense of embarrassment or, basically a strong feeling that their diplomats shouldn't be doing that led to that change. There's some other countries here. It's actually on the list here. Several wealthy Gulf states have had similar crackdowns. Some like very strong U.S. ally Gulf states used to have lots of violations, and they basically stopped. So, maybe for diplomatic reasons, certain countries felt like it was too much of a black eye to have, be among the worst violators. Obviously, it didn't stop Ambassador X, and then there was one case, I think it was Oman. In the case of Oman, they're like the one country that just pays all of the fine. So their diplomats actually get tons of violations, and then they pay $500,000 a year to pay for it. So there's a couple of different outlier cases, but there have been countries that have cracked down. So what you said about sort of kicking people out or punishing them does happen in some of these cases. Did you ever hear that, Paulson?
Yeah, I was saying if you look at the data in the future, one is again to have this party index, we're working that you have to also look at the power differentials between the countries, and after that it's the hours that the 14 hours per country.
That's interesting. Yeah, so for whatever reason they had to go into the office, the mission office, to work. I think probably over time it's less important with internet at home and stuff, but maybe in 98 or 99 still people would have to go in to get faxes or stuff like that. So that's interesting actually. We haven't looked at that. That's an interesting point. Okay, so now there's this second period. I've been mainly focusing on this first period of low legal enforcement. So what happened later on is now there was high enforcement. So we have 3 years of data with high enforcement, and this is what happened. Basically, as I mentioned, the Giuliani administration in New York had made some noises. They had threatened diplomats, but they were told by the State Department that they shouldn't do anything. But in 2002, the Bloomberg administration actually got the State Department to sign off on a new plan, and the plan was not to force payment, but just to start stripping diplomatic plates. And stripping diplomatic plates is a big deal because then it becomes much harder for these individuals to have vehicles. And there was also this threat to subtract their parking ticket fines from foreign aid. Again, even if the parking ticket fine is $500,000, it'll be peanuts compared to many foreign aid budgets. But there was basically this threat. And in fact, when they announced it, they actually stripped at least one plate from 30 countries, basically to show that they meant business. And so then we can see what happens once there's a credible threat of enforcement. Yeah.
When the people write a ticket for the parking violation, do they know the country that the
They don't. So the diplomatic plates are recognizable. They have a D on the end, but there's no way to identify the country. And that's something we were concerned about or interested in, just because you might fear that the police would let certain countries off and target others, but there's no way to know, unless they have a diplomatic plate and then their whole back bumper sticker is filled with Guatemalan flags, and then Guatemala number 1. If I were a policeman, yes, that's a Guatemalan, not a Honduran. Yeah, go ahead.
Having lived in New York a little bit, it seems like there's also the culture of New York at that point. I think most people who work in Manhattan have seen parking violations cost you a business. So that would be another why it might not be that relevant.
Yeah, potentially. Although it's interesting that there's so many countries, even very high-powered, super developed countries, folks coming from Tokyo, London, etc., which are the closest cities, that literally get 0 of the violations. So, but I see your point that there are very different norms about rule breaking, even in San Francisco and New York. Again, I've noticed that. When I go back to New York and I let all the pedestrians cross and I wave at them, and my relatives think they don't know what happened to me out here. So, but I understand that there are big cultural differences. Okay, I want to show you one other time plot. So this is the time plot of average violations per month from 97 to the end of our data in 2005. And I've actually drawn 2 lines here. You can see, let's look before the September 11 attacks. You see there's sort of 3,000 to 5,000 monthly parking violations, so there's tons. Then something very interesting happens on September 11. You see a big drop. This is in a logarithmic scale. That's why the scaling's a little weird. You see a big drop at 9/11. Now, we don't know exactly what happened at 9/11. Part of it was, for a brief period of time, movement was restricted. There was a very large police presence in Manhattan, monitoring all kinds of traffic activities. Traffic patterns were rerouted. Tunnels had inspections, etc. And so I think there was a much stronger police presence. But some of it might go back to this sort of affinity point, that maybe in the aftermath of that attack, there was less willingness to break the rules, or people didn't want to get in trouble with the police, or didn't want to do something that broke norms. Maybe more people were working from home and not going into the office. So there's a lot of explanations as to what happened. One of the things that's most striking in the data, actually, is if you look at the difference in the sort of change in violations from the pre-period to this immediate 9/11 period, the drop in parking violations is much stronger for countries with larger proportions of Muslim population. And maybe that was just a fear from countries with larger Muslim populations, that if they did break the rules, there would be an outcry, or there was a lot of course, violence and attacks against Muslims during that period in the immediate aftermath of 9/11. So it's hard to know exactly what was going on, but there was this temporary drop. But then, a couple months later, the parking violations go up to similar levels to what they were at before, maybe a little lower, until this October 2002 change. And then it's quite striking. You go from like 3,000 or 4,000 violations per month to 50 violations per month. So there's a drop, a massive drop in unpaid diplomatic parking tickets due to this threat to strip diplomatic plates. It was an incredibly effective form of enforcement. Let me pause for a second and see if people see any other patterns here come through. Yeah. Well, you need a license plate to drive. I guess you're making an interesting point, which is if I don't have to pay parking tickets, why can't I just drive without plates? No, seriously. I mean, if you're a diplomatic community, they can't really do anything to you. I guess maybe that was something where there was always enforcement. I'm not sure. Maybe like driving without a license plate was just sort of something where your vehicle could get impounded. It'd be a huge hassle. Like if you can't prove you own it or it's registered to you or something because it's unregistered, then maybe the police would impound it. It'd be a huge hassle. Maybe I'm not sure. They were saying that there were these earlier attempts to kill the parking ticket fund. There's these funny stories from the 60s. What they used to do, there was some provision in New York's parking code, which I think was Mayor Lindsay in the 60s exploited, which was the parking rules said that if you were parked illegally, the police could send a tow truck and move you to another legal spot. That they were legally empowered to do that. If you're blocking a driveway, they could physically move you to a legal spot. So they started doing in the 60s, and they only did this for a few weeks until there was one of these diplomatic outcries. Is they would tow you from wherever you were in New York to like the docks all the way on the west side, which at that time were like rat infested and kind of abandoned warehouses, and you have to go and like find your vehicle somewhere there. So that was another one of these creative attempts, but they gave up on that after a little while.
I don't know if it's represented the same reason, but there's a different method that's connected with the DCs. Like you park somewhere else, like also you go to get your car, it's not there.
They moved it somewhere else.
Yeah, they moved somewhere else. Normally somewhere you get an hour, so I car moved once 4 times in a 24-hour basis before I actually found it. So.
I see. So maybe this is a kind of more wide strategy. Yeah.
About the splitting the diplomatic, I think they're still getting stopped more often. the signal-based time.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why
Yeah.
imagine you walk in on the respond to
Save time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. So if driving without a license, if I have a diplomatic plate, they can ticket me, but they know they can't do too much to me. But if I don't have a plate, they don't know who I am. They don't know I'm a diplomat. That's right. So I'd be stopped. So even if they eventually let me go, the police may stop me for 20 minutes and sort of defeat the purpose. So maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's what it is. Yeah.
Might have also been a good market for have traffic cops or I mean, like, there's always scandals in New York about ticket codes and stuff like that. So
I see.
they thought they could like people for enforcement, and then we may also require police officers probably going to be trouble too.
Yeah, it could be. It could be. I'm not sure how much that came into play just because these were going unpaid. So if you made it depends if the quota is how much you bring in or how many tickets you issue, but if it's how many tickets you issue, then yes. If it's how much you bring in, then issuing these tickets were really a waste of your time because you might have thought the opposite would be a problem, which would be they'd be under-ticketing because they would know they were never going to get the money. And I think it was, like they established this database and Giuliani said, ticket these guys, let's record it so we have data. Of course, that's what allowed us to do this study. Okay, so just to summarize some of the patterns and we'll go on to the next point, one of the striking things was just that African countries have so many violations. And again, if we bring it back to our Norway versus Nigeria comparison, based on the kind of regression result, moving in our data from being a relatively uncorrupt to a pretty corrupt country is associated with a big increase in almost a doubling in the predicted number of tickets. Because even some countries that are low corruption countries in the pre-enforcement period were getting tickets. I showed you the bottom of the list, but there are some countries that had some violations. I'll show you them in a second. But the change to legal enforcement is incredibly stark. So basically, parties parking tickets go away, 98% reduction. And this is actually the data in the little letters, if you can see them, are the different countries. So Nigeria is way up there. They're a very corrupt country based on the corruption measure, and they have a lot of violations. And Norway is a country that's in this blob here. You can't see them. There's a lot of countries with very low measured corruption, basically zero violations. They're all kind of clustered there. But there's a lot of countries in between. There's a lot of European countries that have plenty of parking tickets. France, Portugal, Spain, and Italy. If you can see those abbreviations there. And if you look at the different countries, some of the rankings in terms of parking tickets actually correspond with survey evidence on corruption levels. So Italy is commonly thought of as one of the most corrupt countries in Western Europe based on lots of data, and there they are as one of the most corrupt Western European countries in terms of parking tickets. This paper got quite a bit of media attention when it came out because in every part of the world, people were very concerned about what their diplomats were doing, and they were writing. In Brazil, they said, "Oh no, it was like a lead article. Study shows Brazilian diplomats are most corrupt relative to all of our Latin American neighbors." So people were very concerned about the relative ranking. Among the Baltic states, the Estonians, are we worse than the Latvians or better than the Latvians? That was a very important issue, and there were articles about it. And so in every sub-region, there was this kind of navel gazing. But some of the general patterns are clear. As we mentioned before, there's some countries that are measured to be quite corrupt, like Ecuador, that for some reason, maybe because the embassy, the mission is sort of enforcing discipline or whatnot, have very few violations. So there's a lot of variation here, but a lot of the broad patterns fit the survey evidence. There's a very strong positive relationship here. Okay, so let me transition really to the next topic. Unless there's any other thoughts or comments on the diplomats? Yeah, go ahead. I see, because they're kind of in a rush. That's really interesting. We haven't looked at that. I wonder if there are UN data that one could use to get at that, because there are meeting minutes and attendance taken, all these kinds of things. So I wonder if you could kind of establish, get data on that in the same kind of setting. But we never had the data to look at that. But it could be correlated. It could be correlated. One of the things that I didn't really mention so far is there are some. You just mentioned time. So when you think of it, there is some evolution over time in your violations, which is the longer you're in this environment, even if you come from a relatively uncorrupt country, you tend to commit more violations. So it kind of looks like even the diplomats from the low corruption countries over time, not those ones that had zeros, obviously they were literally zeros, but the kind of Italy's and Spain's and the countries in the middle, like over time, they're kind of, oh, I can kind of get away with this. And since we have sort of the names of diplomats, we just basically looked at cases where we had diplomatic names and license plate linked to that name, and we knew that the little amount of time they were in New York, you could see this increase over time. So there was some learning about how you could be corrupt when you're in a low enforcement environment over time. And I think it raises an issue which I kind of mentioned on this slide, which is, are the norms being influenced by the laws, right? So to the extent that the diplomats are in a low enforcement environment for a long time, their own norms start weakening. The opposite could be true too. And we should really think of norms and laws as possibly reinforcing each other over time. So maybe it isn't a coincidence that places that have had very strong legal enforcement in terms of cracking down on corruption or crime, for many decades, when you actually look at social attitudes in those countries, they tend to have very strong anti-corruption social attitudes. So these things sort of reinforce each other in both directions. And it kind of makes the issue of moving to a less corrupt setting challenging. Where do you begin? If you're in a place where the laws don't work and the norms don't work, how can we get to a setting where both of these things reinforce each other? I mean, there's a lot of moving parts. Even if I try to change the norms, if I don't change the laws appropriately, maybe I won't get any action, vice versa. You may need to move a lot of things at once to move into a new equilibrium set of behavior. So there's some notion of maybe a multiple equilibria. That said, if we go back to the case of Colombia, I think it is a fair question to ask ourselves, as I mentioned at the end of the lecture last time, how generalizable are these actions? Are there things we could learn from successful cases that could be applied elsewhere, or do we need to be incredibly creative and innovative in every setting in order to find ways to change social norms that are very specific to a certain setting? So maybe, like I mentioned last time, maybe mines wouldn't work in Sierra Leone, but maybe other types of reforms would.